Thank you so much for joining us for the very final episode of Season 2, Tea Time with Talent Acquisition. It's a very special episode because we're joined by our very own delivery partner, Aimée Ellerton, who has spent the last 2 years working with us, supporting a number of different organisations as one of our delivery partners. So for the final time of this season, this is what we've got coming up in today's show.
Ultimately, within talent and recruitment, it's very collaborative. So adapting to that and ways in which they work, also what their communication style is, how much they like to be kept in the loop, how much they don't like to be kept also in the loop. I think it's about understanding how you fit within that. For me, when it came to stepping into design, it was about understanding what these people read, what events they joined, what videos they were watching. I signed up to Google Alerts, Eventbrite, everything around my market that wasn't just LinkedIn. Obviously, a large portion of people sit on there, but there's people that write articles, there's events going on all the time. So for me, it was about learning what they was interested in to then go and find them.
Now, although this is titled Recruitment in the Early Years, I promise you there is so much to learn from this podcast, and it doesn't matter if you've got 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years. The information that Aimée shares around creating a unique delivery process, building networks from scratch, and motivating yourself through adversity is relevant to every single person. So hopefully, you stay along for the journey and you get some key takeaways. I know I have. I look forward to seeing you in Season 3. For now, enjoy. Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. There's no surefire way to accomplish anything in life, but with each conversation, we aim to delve into diverse topics, present fresh perspectives to empower you, our fellow colleague, on your own journey to success. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by our very own delivery partner here at Peritus Partners. A recruiting specialist who in her first 2 years in the role has supported a number of high-profile organisations find top talent within product and design. Coming into the role with absolutely no recruitment experience, she has forged her own style and process to support young startups, growing scale-ups, and mature enterprise teams. Now looking to share what she has learned to those within the talent acquisition and recruitment community who might be just starting out in their own first recruiting position. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, delivery partner, Aimée Ellerton.
You
didn't know about the introduction, did you?
No, I didn't know what was coming. I was a bit nervous.
No, it's all good. I mean, obviously, I'm super excited to dive into this because I think, it's been 10 years from my side, and you kind of forget what it's like a little bit at the beginning. So I'm really kind of excited to see kind of what you've experienced over the last 2 years, kind of starting from scratch. But before we dive into the core of what we're going to talk about, I want to kick off this, which is actually the final episode of Season 2, how I've done every other episode so far, and that's asking you, what is one thing you feel everybody is doing in our field, but it's something that could be improved further?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think that first communication that you have with someone is probably something that you'd leave a lasting impression, but also need to use to the best of your advantage. And what I guess I mean by that is really tapping into what motivates someone, what they want from a job, why they're even looking to leave their current job, rather than, jumping straight into what a particular role is, about the company, a little obviously overview about themselves. I think if you really tap into why someone wants to move in the first place or why they're even interested in your company, it will probably save you a lot of time and potentially heartache later down the process. For example, if someone's looking or someone's interested in remote, they have a young family, but you have a position that's on site full time, realistically, they're probably not going to take that, as harsh as that sounds. So I think it's really tapping into not only surface level, but also what motivates someone even behind the scenes, whether that be family, long-term goals. Save yourself a lot of heartache now, but also can repurpose that in the future and kind of hopefully share something more interesting if what you have isn't as good.
Definitely. I think, hopefully you don't mind me sharing this, but you probably learned the hard way in some of the examples and on kind of why we should be doing that, and kind of circling into where you are, 2 years in with no experience, this being your first recruitment role. There's a lot to learn, there's a lot to take in, a lot to remember. So I guess kind of the core of what we want to focus about is what do you feel are the key aspects that either somebody who's coming into recruitment for the first time, or maybe someone who's been here, say 6 months, 12 months, or moving into their kind of second role, what do you feel are the key aspects that they should be looking out for to really hit the ground running in this job?
Yeah, I think only now, probably past 6 months, it's been kind of clear what it really means to work in talent. Like you said, I think I joined literally with zero experience, even office experience. It was such a learning curve. I think there's kind of core aspects, not only maybe personality wise and kind of character wise, but also with day-to-day work as well, having a good kind of process that's definitely fit for your style and your work style. Even looking into our office, everyone is completely different, and coming into with no experience and to kind of morph into or try to morph into different ways, it just didn't work. You have to kind of come up with your own strategy. Definitely building your kind of stance in the market, or at least having a voice, or begin to have a voice in your market. You want to be known for what you do and people to come to you with that kind of source of knowledge, whether it be now or it's in the future. And I think one of the biggest things, and it's probably most prevalent this year, is or 2023, is kind of that motivation. There are times when you're not going to have the best news, not everything's going to go in your favour, and you are just going to kind of ride the wave of recruitment. And I think it's kind of keeping that motivation and mindset throughout all of that, especially if you're amongst peers that are kind of like yourselves 10 years down the line of experience. There's a lot of things that aren't going to go your way, just as a learning curve. So it's kind of keeping motivated and making sure you ride the roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean, I want to break these down with you bit by bit if it's cool, because I think each of them are so important to kind of explore. So you mentioned at the beginning process. So I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So how we are in the office is that, we have a organizational process, what the clients and what the candidates that we represent will have the same standard of kind of expectations, but then how you go out and achieve your part of the job, you're right, it differentiates between how I do it versus how you do it, versus obviously how our colleagues do it. And it's about, finding what works for you. So from what you've learned so far, why is having your own process actually important?
I think, especially in talent, you're kind of being steered or spinning lots of different plates. So you obviously have to make sure that you're in control of the wheel, so to say, as there's so many different things to spin. Obviously, I learned quite quickly that everyone is so different, and what works for one doesn't work for another. I think it's being a sponge to adapt to that. As well, within the talent space, you might have one role that's within design. You might, on the other hand, be working a role the next day that's data. So if you're all over the place and your mind's all over the place, it's going to run true within your work. I think I learned that early on, is you have to kind of knuckle down what your process is, whether that be very detail orientated and you track every single thing, every single movement, every single message, or you might be a bit more sporadic and a bit more kind of a better memory than me, and be able to just remember things, remember people, and pull off the cuff. For me, when I was trying to do a process differently or trying to mold the way I work for different people, I just found that it got more in a muddle, and you're definitely less productive. Time is definitely money within talent. So the longer you spend kind of trying to find a process or find a way that works that's not right for you, you're going to be wasting your time.
How did you actually find what worked for you? what strategies did you adopt, or what did you do over the last 2 years that kind of got you to where you can comfortably run any, and I do wholeheartedly mean this, you can run any process. It doesn't matter if you've ever worked that job before, you are capable of doing that. I can see it firsthand. So how have you got to that point?
I think, firstly, it was understanding what people's processes were, especially in the early days. Like for me, coming in, I didn't have a clue how to even use LinkedIn, let alone run a process. So I think it's speaking with everyone around you, how they work, and naturally, personality-wise, you'll see who fits better for you. Obviously, a bit more detail orientated, and you track everything. That's more me. That's how I am in day-to-day life. But then elements of other people you work with, so kind of Mark's maybe off the cuff way of working, and a little bit more, what's the word? I don't want to say sporadic as such, but it's kind of, for me, understanding who around me, how they work, and taking little pieces of that pie. Ultimately, you're going to have obviously targets for the week and understanding the priorities for them. I also think it's a lot of trial and error. In the early days, I used to kind of jump straight into tasks, jump straight into things, and not actually sit back and think, okay, what am I actually going to do? What is going to be, what is going to work for me? I think take a little bit from everyone. One of the biggest things I actually learned was to block out your calendar. Some people, they don't have calendars, they don't use calendars, they would still listen and work through it. For me, I have to kind of track every single timestamp of my day. And that was only through trial and error of, so I've blocked certain times, so messages at certain time every morning, half an hour. If it's early, obviously I move on to the next thing, but I make sure that I do that every single day. Then it was also trial and error. I found if I was having calls and then a break and then a call and then a break, then I was unproductive. Or if I had a call mid-task, that wasn't very productive for me. I'd find it hard to get back into the task. I think it's definitely on personality type. If you're someone that needs to kind of deep focus, deep dive into something, and then you're throwing something else, it's not going to be as productive to go back to. So I've definitely found kind of book ending sessions or sourcing sessions with calls, or doing just calling sessions, just sourcing sessions. There's a lot of S's in that. And I also found in terms of kind of finding that process as well, is to, you're in control of your own time. I think in the early days I was very much like maybe a morph to other people's timeframes and days, whereas now I think there's no harm in giving timeframes to someone and say, I'm available between this time and this time, when are you free within that, rather than kind of letting someone else dictate your day. I think it kind of goes back to protecting your time. But I definitely think it's more of a trial and error, and understanding first and foremost how you work, adapting that, whether it was if you come straight from uni, how you work from there or in your previous jobs, and then obviously maximising as much as you can from that, and taking little pieces of the pie from everyone around you. I also think kind of in them early days, when it comes to using your time wisely, is also make sure you learn time for growth. So I always on a Friday used to do different sessions with different people, with learning, whether it be in the team or also externally as well, kind of making sure that you allow time from that. But it's very much personal dependent. If you're like me and have a color coded calendar with Outlook, Trello, CRM,
I'm very much like that as well. I wonder where you learned that one from.
Yeah, I know. But everyone, I guess, is going to have their own style, and it's kind of sticking true to what it's square peg round hole at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's important, kind of echoing what you said about halfway through, is that, you know, you've got so much on, and people dictate. If you kind of try and arrange an interview, they'll dictate the time for you, and then before you know it, you've got call, break, call, break, call, break, and then you end up losing an hour and a half by having those breaks, because it takes 10 minutes to get into a task. You work for 10 minutes, then you need to plan for the call, and it becomes, you know, I don't want to say wasted of time, but you do lose a lot of time. The chunking element, and I would echo kind of what you're saying there, is it's been a game changer seeing how you've done that, and how you've gone from working bits here, bits there, and then being able to prioritize plan your week thoroughly and confidently to say, okay, I'm doing this at this time, this at this time. and just being protective. I think we always talk about protecting your time, and it doesn't matter if you're internal or external recruitment. You need to protect your time because everyone wants something at some point, and if you say yes to everyone, then you're never going to actually have time to do anything. So it's about saying yes to the right things, and pushing back where you can. But it's difficult to learn that. And obviously, you said you've learned from us being around you. So let's say, for example, you're in a different team, and maybe you don't have the luxury of having people that have 10 years experience around you. How could you still kind of learn even from juniors, people who are in maybe the similar boat? Is there any strategies or anything that you could work on to try and kind of create a learning culture, even when your team is quite junior still?
Yeah, I think it's definitely understanding the ways in which people work. Ultimately, within talent and recruitment, it's very collaborative. So adapting to that and ways in which they work, also what their communication style is, how much they like to be obviously kept in the loop, how much they don't like to be kept also in the loop. I think it's about understanding how you fit within that. I think it's when you join early on in recruitment, it's very much a case of what's right, your elements of people pleasing and things like that. So to be able to say strong and think, actually, no, I'm going to do this and then do that, and also justifying why you're doing something, I think is also key. Just to kind of go back to the point that you said about kind of dictating your own time, I also found massively different techniques like suggesting times, but also not using Calendly. That was one of the things that I kind of got rid of very early on. It's adapting to how people work. A lot of people use that, but I found for me that was not a way to keep on track or on target with my goals, with my targets. I'm really sorry, even the door's just gone and the dogs. Can you hear the dogs?
Can't hear the dog, no. But I'm curious, if the dog can jump up, I'm very open to put the dog on the video. It's not an issue.
It really threw me off halfway through that.
No, it's fine.
It's done.
I think with the element of what I was saying early years, and the title of this is recruitment in the early years, and we're talking back about how you first started, the process of creating your own process. I mean, yeah, that sentence does work fairly, but that it doesn't matter if you're 2 years in, 6 months in, 10 years in. I mean, the last year alone has shown that what worked in 2021, 22 didn't work in 2023, and you saw firsthand how a decade of experience sometimes doesn't mean much. You have to adapt to the market. You have to adjust how you work, and so it's always about working out what works at that time. Lean into that a bit more. Who can you learn from around you, internal, external, as you've said, rightfully so, and kind of giving yourself the best opportunity to adapt. And like I said, I think although we're talking about the early years, because you're coming from no experience and found a process, I still think an adaptation of that process is a continued improvement. It's never finished. And I think you actually said the comment yesterday, we work in a job that's, you're never going to finish. You're just never going to get to the end of that task. There's something always more to do, more messages to send, more calls to have, more opportunities to discuss. So it's about knowing what does that look like in a continued motion.
Yeah, I think it's also for us as well, and going back to what you're saying, kind of adapting to any team, is we start with the targets. What are the targets for the week? What are the targets for that particular role? And then work backwards. That was always been kind of the most productive way for me to work as well. And what's been quite good, obviously each team's different, but having a kind of Monday catch-up call, what your week looks like, and then a recap call at the end of the week, it also holds you accountable. But I think working backwards from them targets, it breaks down how your week looks as well. If you're coming into a week and your calendar's completely clear and you've got no time, nothing booked in, then it is a bit daunting. But once you start with targets, then you break down different sourcing sessions, different times that you need, having time for follow-ups, things like that. Another kind of way in which any team or any role you're doing is find out how much you can do in a certain amount of time, and then that's kind of your benchmark. I think we've talked about this before, is see how much you can get done in 2 hours, and then how much you get done in 4 hours or 1 hour, and then that's kind of a way to again go back to the targets. If you think, well, I've got to get certain amount of candidates through this pipeline. I need to send out this many messages, which means that time, and then that's probably the best way to kind of begin your process and definitely understand, like back to the first point, how you work best. You may only, be able to do. Everyone works at their own pace.
It also gives you the opportunity to stand up to hiring managers who are, banging on saying we need 3 CVs tomorrow. It's like, brilliant, but you've had 2 CVs in, say, 5 days. This is the work you've done to do that. Unless something drastic is changing, then it's unrealistic. So whatever the case is, if you understand what the targets are and you understand the actions to get those targets, then you're in a better position as a talent specialist to consult. I think a lot of people kind of forget that part of our job. We are consultants. Sometimes we say things that you want to hear, sometimes we say things you don't want to hear, and that's the reality of it. We only deal with facts. I can't remember what you said to me yesterday, but the comment about something about facts is the only truth or whatever. But it is true. I mean, you can't make adjustments. You kind of remember it now, right? Oh, I'm not just losing my head. But you can't make adjustments. You can't make suggestions. You can't consult from authority unless you understand what the data says and what the facts of that data are. And that only starts with what your targets, how do you work from that, and how do you get to those targets? You have a process that works with you. The other element you mentioned was networking. So you've come in, and to kind of give our listeners a bit of a story, you came into a position where pivoted within the first 6 weeks, let's say that. So obviously we hired you for an opportunity to join and embed into one of the largest e-commerce fashion stores in Berlin. And then very quickly that role disappeared because of what was happening around the world. So you pivoted away from what we thought was going to be quite a dead cert opportunity for you for at least a 6-month period, and then being thrown into so much more. And then over that kind of 18 months, the 19, 20 months after that, you've done mostly product and design, but in and around that, done some data, you've done some software. So you've kind of had different roles. But your core focus, market networking wise, is design and product, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely been a bit of a roller coaster to get there.
Yeah. I mean, welcome to the world of startups. So let's take it from the steps of a new recruiter joining a new company. Because it doesn't matter if you're a senior or fresh to recruitment at this point. You go join a new company, you potentially are going to be hiring for things that you've never hired for. But the good news about it is if you're hiring a tech recruiter for a company, or if you're a tech recruiter in a company, you're going to be hiring consistently around that certain tech. So what steps could somebody do, or what steps could somebody take to start building a network within the niche that they're going to be hiring in within their role?
Yeah, I think it's such a broad question, but in terms of where to start, it's finding where these talent, where these people sit, whether that be certain location or certain areas. For us, obviously, mainly being Germany, it made it slightly easier in one country to kind of keep it to. But I think kind of starting out with that, there's groups. I joined a lot of groups early on with LinkedIn, not necessarily to straight away start kind of interacting or speaking on there, because at the end of the day, I had no kind of knowledge of what to even say on there, but just generally know what these people talked about. Some of the profiles on there are very skeleton as well, so kind of gave an overview of who you were looking for. I also think it was, for me, identifying what companies kind of hired that kind of talent, what they looked for, what their backgrounds were. I think for me, when it came to stepping into design, it was about understanding what these people read, what events they joined, what videos they were watching. I signed up to Google Alerts, Eventbrite, everything around my market that wasn't just LinkedIn. Obviously, a large portion of people sit on there, but there's people that write articles, there's events going on all the time. So for me, it was about learning what they was interested in to then go and find them. I know it's cliche to say, but just speaking to people. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the phone, but it's just kind of understanding what they're working on. You know, everyone's going to be excited about what it is that they're doing. I think speaking to people and coming up, asking them, what is this? What is this technology? What do you think's up and coming? You'll be surprised kind of how receptive people are if you say, I'm fairly new to this market, I'm looking to kind of make a stance. What do you think of this technology, or what do you think's coming up? You'd be surprised how receptive people are to kind of explaining and talking things through for you, and to also connect you after that. If you say kind of you're building a network, people more often than not will connect you and put you in the right direction that you need to go anyway. But kind of when it comes to starting out, I think it's maybe not necessarily what everyone thinks, to get people on the phone and speak to them, but actually doing the background work of what is it that people are reading, what are they attending, what are they kind of doing behind the scenes. So then when you get on the phone, kind of have a basis conversation of, I'm interested because I've done the background work, but I need you to kind of explain it a little bit more for me.
I've done that because you froze, by the way, so I'm going to get Vicky to stitch this part. Vicky, when you're listening, can you find a natural break in Amy's voice? And that last point is really good and stick together nicely. Thank you. We'll continue.
Thanks.
So you go and find where these people sit. You just absorb as much as you could to learn, and then you'd use that information just to build connections, ask open questions, and just be a learner in this instance.
And also, I think your LinkedIn presence is very much kind of a reflective of who you are. It's kind of a magazine cover to what you do. I think a lot of people take that for granted as well. Yes, when you got on the phone to someone, you can explain who you are and what you do. But if you're anything like me and kind of grew up in the world of Instagram and Facebook, you kind of do your background research before speaking to anyone anyway. And I think that's the prime opportunity. Even if it's in the early days, I didn't know enough to kind of post blog articles or things like that, but reposting different things or commenting or tagging people, I think it's just a way to kind of get your market known, and you'll be surprised kind of how many people hear about that and then also come back to you as well.
Yeah, I think that. By the way, I really like that comment of your LinkedIn is like your magazine cover. Might coin that now. I'll give you the credit. Don't worry. I really like that. But I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
One thing that works, that I found works really well, and this kind of comes. I know you do it. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it yet, but I'll say the name Martin, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about now. But you have people that you trust, and I don't know whether or not we find it easier as external recruiters to call up somebody and say, look, I don't know this, can you explain it to me? Because, as an internal, you're kind of expected to be the person who can answer all the questions. But in reality, we can't. Like, you just can't. And people understand that. So I've got a collection. I mean, I'd say 20 odd companies, 20 odd contacts of different levels, C-suite, VPs, etc., that I just message, say, look, I've seen this. What is it? Can you explain it to me in layman's term? Or if I'm like, for example, I've got somebody in the green space that I know very well, and I'm just asking him question after question after question, just to absorb knowledge and to grow. And I think that what you've done.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say that was a kind of massive reality check for me early on, and I think, obviously, Mark, we work with, will say the same. I used to think I needed to know everything about that job, everything about the technology, but there's just no, you're a recruiter, not a designer or not a data engineer, that your job is to find the right job and obviously put them through the process. Your job is not to code or not to design. So they know that as well. And I think that was the biggest thing for me to overcome early on, is I was so afraid of sounding silly or stupid on the phone. You're speaking to some really kind of senior people sometimes, and you don't want on the other phone to not sound kind of creditable, but your value is brought in another way to them. So they're relying on you to bring value to them when it comes to their market, their recruitment process, but you also need to rely on them for their value to bring to you as well, in understanding what is going on.
I think as long as a recruiter, you're able to pitch the company and you're able to give an overview of the opportunity, without going to the nitty gritty. If you can, fantastic. There are definitely some typical recruiters out there that come from a technical background and are capable of doing that. But 99% of us aren't. And like I said, the candidates know that. So as long as you as a recruiter are capable to sit there and say, this is the company, these are the values, this is our culture, this is an overview of the job, but the next interview you'll find out more. That is far more than most companies are going to be offering. So, but like you said, it's about knowing that that's okay and not being fearful of sounding, as you say, silly or whatnot. A really good question that I ask, or I say question, a statement that I say to people if I don't know something is, I might ask a silly question, just entertain me, right? Because I don't know sometimes, and I'll just ask the question and write it word for word what they say, take that to the hiring manager and say, look, can you explain this to me? And then the next meeting we have, you learn a little bit more, and then you learn a little bit more, and through these conversations, you grow. So it's from your side, building that network, it's absorb the knowledge, regurgitate or reshare others' knowledge to start that process of getting your name into the market until you feel that you're ready to start producing your own content.
Yeah, I even earlier on used to book out sessions fortnightly of just general market research. Not only to kind of for my own personal, to feel like I knew a little bit more when I got on the phone with someone to comment on things or kind of help build that rapport, but also kind of forward thinking of what's coming up, what could be interesting for people. That every fortnightly just helped me to kind of be a little bit more immersed in that world. Obviously, then you come up with things to kind of repost and share with your network that will find interest in. But it's kind of looking or spending that time to really sit with the network that you're working with. I think in the early days, I used to think that was counterproductive, but so much come from that, from just looking into what was out there in my network outside of obviously finding people for it.
I mean, we have the luxury, you focus on product design, I focus on software. So we have the luxury of being a bit more niche. And some companies, depending if you're a larger talent acquisition team, you'll probably be, I don't know, front end or back end tech recruiter. And again, you have that luxury. But if you're a more generalist recruiter, the best thing I would probably suggest to anyone maybe in that position is take a look at what does your hiring roadmap look like for the year, and then determine where do you believe you're going to be hiring the most people. If it's in marketing, then invest heavy amounts of time into finding marketing specialists in, do what we're doing, what you're talking about here, and find the niches, because you can't do it for everything. Otherwise you become a generalist and then you lose the voice that you can gain. So you need to be focusing, what am I hiring for the most? And if it's an equal 1-1-1-1, you might find this challenging, but it's likely you're going to be hiring more in one area than another. And that's how you can kind of break it down if you're not a niche recruiter. What common mistakes do you think recruiters should be avoiding when establishing a new network?
I think going back to kind of the first question with that first communication is where you're going to find out the most information, kind of probably leave a lasting impression on them as well. And also it is that first touch point. So I think when it comes to establishing a network, having that kind of introduction to yourself of who you are, what you do, especially if you are in a kind of bit more of a niche of saying, this is what I do, this is, what the company does, just so obviously people have a background. I think some people kind of assume that, you've met before and you know exactly who they're talking to, but that's not always the case. So I think it's in that first communication, or maybe mistake is not looking beyond that. I think within the network, yes, you may have a certain role in design for a certain company, but you need to find out their motivations to see if actually the role that you have is going to be interesting for them. You don't want to kind of, like I said, get late down the line and you think actually this role isn't for them. If you truly find out kind of in that first establishment or first communication, not necessarily on the phone, then that will definitely kind of benefit. I also think when it comes to establishing new network, is research. If you're not doing enough research into, new tools or new trends, learning what it is in the industry that people actually want to talk about or what they actually want from a job, then again, you're going to kind of run into some sticky situations there. For me, especially when it came to joining the design network, I learned very quickly kind of what designers wanted and what designers didn't want. So it became quite easy to establish different kind of common ground to talk about, and get more on the level and feel like an ally to them in a way. So I think when it comes to common mistakes, it's actually truly finding out what it is in the market that people want, which could be a whole range of things. Like I said, it could be motivations, what they're looking for. It could be broader sense, people want, I don't know, user-driven companies or working more with AI, things like that. I think it's actually getting a bit under the bonnet rather than surface level communication.
Talking all the lingo now, I love it. And on that element of on that element of allyship, it's interesting you say. It's actually I spoke to a lady called Ala from I believe she's at Scoutbee in the first season, and she used the exact phrase that, you know, as a recruiter, you are an ally to the candidate, and you know, you're not there to push them through a process. You're not there to halt them from the process, but you're there to be an ally to them, to support and guide them, but make sure that the role is right for them. And if it's not, voice it, because if it's not right and they take the job, you're going to find out very, very quickly, right? So it's about, as you say, getting under the bonnet, as it were, and you know, being honest and consultative. And I guess, as you said, use that information you've learned through your research to work out what are people interested in, and how to best present what you have.
I think as well, the minute that you're honest and upfront and more consultative, I've learned, you know, in the early days, I didn't want to kind of say the wrong thing or say this role isn't for you. I used to think, well, who am I to say this role's not for you? But you know the role, you don't necessarily know them, you're getting to know them. So you only base off what you know and what they tell you. It's kind of, a square peg round hole. And the minute that you're a little bit more, or take a consultative approach and you say, actually, I don't think this is for you, that's when you, as a kind of ally to them, become more trusted. I think that's when they actually think, you're not just telling me what I want to hear. I think that became a big turning point for me early on as well, is actually not being afraid to address, I don't think this is right. As much as sometimes that can hurt you inside, if you've got targets to get out 3 CVs in a certain amount of time, it does hurt a little bit, but it's just going to be a waste of your time later down the line. And another positive to that is you will become more credible to them. You know, you want someone that's not afraid to tell you the harsh reality sometimes.
Also might have a better opportunity next week within the team come up that you don't know about, and you can go back to that candidate and say, hey, this role wasn't right, but this one is. And if you've done your job correctly and you've done a good candidate experience, then they would be more than happy to converse with you again and see if it's right. There's so many candidates that are just pushed to one side, from both internal and external. As much as people probably don't agree with it, we all know it happens, that they're just pushed to one side because they're not right for that role today. And then, you know, it's just a lost opportunity for something potentially in the future. The best internal teams are the ones that nurture. And I tell you what, I don't think you've had the opportunity to work with them, and I bang on about them all the time, but Moya, if anyone is listening, MOIA, Moya has probably one of the best talent acquisition teams that I know, because over the last year, they haven't been hiring en masse, but they've been nurturing so many people. They won't need to use recruiters for the next 2-3 years. I mean, will be used for very sporadic roles, but because they've done such a good job, it's how it should be done. Use them as a kind of a reference. And if you check out their LinkedIn and you'll see the information they're posting, you'll see what I'm talking about when they're nurturing. But it's about making sure that everyone feels like a human. They feel valued in that process.
Yeah. And especially with that kind of early stage of the process, you want to make sure an interview especially goes both ways. Although you're the one being interviewed, you actually are interviewing them. So you want to make sure that the role's right for you and the role is best for you, and you're relying on that person to kind of, although you're making your own judgment, to say whether that is going to kind of adhere to your career goals. So if it might not be now, there might be something in the future, but having a kind of recruiter that you rely on who knows exactly what your motivations are and what you're looking for, that benefit goes both ways, similar to Moya in the sense that, you know, you've got a pool of people that you can go back to and know probably a high percentage that they're actually going to take the role that you're now hiring for, because you know exactly what they're looking for. You know, you're not pushing them through the process then hoping for the best at the end, but also for the candidate experience as well. You know, if you're, as humans, you like to feel understood, you like to think that people know what you want kind of longer term, so you're then going to be more I guess, what's the word? More, I can't think of the word, but to go back
if
to
they
that,
respond, if they message you,
particular talent, receptive. Yeah, mind went blank.
fine. So moving on from that, the last point you mentioned was around motivation, and I think the last year's tested a lot of people in talent acquisition. It's tested a lot of people around the world, but in talent acquisition and recruitment, you know, I'm not saying we were hit the hardest, don't get me wrong, but we were hit hard repeatedly over the course of a year, and still going into 2024. I firmly, and I said this to you yesterday, I firmly believe your ability to overcome adversity is probably your biggest strength that I've seen since we've been colleagues. It's been incredible to see, genuinely, because it's been a very, very challenging 12-month period versus the first 6 to 12 months, which was relatively all high flying for you, right? So what are some effective ways that helped you get through this last 12 months, you know, to stay motivated when times in your career were very, very challenging?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Also, it does boil down to who you are as a person. If you are able to kind of be resilient or bounce back. In terms of, for me, there was definitely times when, like you said, when I first joined Peritus, it was crazy. It was like all hands on deck. There was so much going on, and then to kind of have a bit of a slowdown on that, and kind of with everyone in the market facing that challenge of 2023, it was always, for me, important to remember, firstly, the long-term vision of why you are doing what you're doing. You know that things change, the market can change, but also to remember what you've achieved. For me, in the very early days, and I think actually it came from you, it was to each day, so I have my normal calendar and I always have a diary calendar that I just write little things on, and I would do 2 stars from the day and a target. So for me, if I got to the end of the day and I thought, oh my goodness, nothing's gone right, I've had someone's pulled from the process, someone hasn't, things happen throughout the day, and you tend to, as human nature, not always remember the best things. But if I would write the 2 stars and a target, it sounds kind of cheesy, but at the end of the day, I would think, actually, I did do that, and the target was always something kind of more motivating for the next day or for the next week. For me, it just reminded me, you know what, I'm not crap at this job. I can do something because I've achieved. And I think it's also having that realisticness of, in the early days, that you are going to make mistakes. I think for me,
we'll make mistakes, by the way, 10 years in,
anyone's listening,
make them all the time. I'm talking about myself, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not sitting there just badgering you saying you make mistakes. Don't worry, I'm referring to me.
No, but I think in the early days, it's just part of everything you do is not going to be perfect every single time. So for me, the second I realised that was the case, and not everyone is perfect, I think when I first joined, listening to podcasts and listening to people's early careers outside of the bubble in the office, I would listen to plug Hisham's podcast. There was other kind of different platforms online. For me, that was kind of a motivation of, there's other people doing this and this is how they're doing it. It was, for me, a way to learn what people's careers were like early on. Because, if you're working with people like yourselves, got 10 years experience, you do notice the gap, and you do think, oh goodness, like one day I'll be able to grasp everything. But I think it's a combination of also understanding your why and the long-term vision. Who you surround yourself as well is going to be, especially the past year, I think we talk about this a lot in the office, is who you surround yourself with and who you kind of choose to, not necessarily choose, but it's keeping that positive vibes going and knowing that if you're consistently adding value every single day, it is going to pay off.
So how important do you feel resilience is for recruitment, and how can it actually be developed from your own experiences?
Yeah, I think as one of my another reality check that I had early on is the quicker that you realise recruitment and the talent world is a roller coaster, I think the quicker that you learn resilience. And you can either sit and dwell, or you can, just get on with it. The good thing, like we spoke about earlier, is the job is never really ending, so you can quickly throw yourself into something else. I think in terms of how it can be developed, it is just a way to kind of make sure your mental mindset in a way is strong. If you know each day you're adding value and doing everything you can to almost set yourself up for the future, whether it be the conversations you have, the value that you're adding, kind of the way in which you're communicating with your market, it is something that has to pay off later down the line, or at least something we believe in the office as well. I also think when it comes to developing resilience, it's using the time maybe in when it's not so easy and it's a little bit harder, is to kind of pivot and do something that is going to bring you something, either value, or it is going to help you. If you're doing the same thing every day, it is going to be tiresome, it's going to be harder. Something that I think brought a lot of resilience or a lot of positivity in a time when it was maybe challenging within the market, is to get yourself out there and do other things. We did webinars, blog articles. I don't necessarily mean resilience in the sense of you're knocked with a no or a hardship, but it's just a way to kind of build another feather to your bow in a hard time. And I think with that in mind, if you're adding value elsewhere, then it is going to pay off at some point, especially in the early days. Celebrating the small wins helps to kind of build up that resilience. So if you are doing other positive aspects within the market, is going to definitely develop that. But I think more of a mindset of understanding that this job isn't smooth sailing, it's not easy. And if you think that that's the case, then maybe not necessarily consider something else, but kind of considering how you would personally adapt to that. I think the good thing about this job is no 2 days are the same. So you can either run with that, or you can sit in a
I love the way that you just celebrate the small wins.
But yeah, I think
it's so overlooked because our job is relying on hiring people, and everyone's like, "Yeah, how many hires have you made?" I mean, we was having a conversation today when your mum would say, "How many placements you done today?" Like, mum, it doesn't work like that for us. I mean, internal, you can make quite a few placements in a month, but external works a little bit different. But to celebrate the small wins. What went well, for that day, and then I mean, I always kind of explain to people, people myself really, as long as you end the day doing something or achieving something that you hadn't done yesterday, it doesn't matter if you had an offer rejected, you had a candidate drop out, a job that was closed that you thought you was going to fill. But if you moved the needle somewhere and you kind of progress something, then that's important. And then you can look back and say today was a good day, and then tomorrow you go again. The amount of times I've said over the last year, we go again tomorrow, or we go again now. It's resilience is super important. And like I said, I think it's your biggest strength that you've demonstrated. But we're going to wrap up there for now. So thank you so much for joining and taking us through the early years of what you feel is important for us in recruitment. And like I said, although we're talking about early years, all these are so transferable to any amount of experience in recruitment and any position that kind of falls under the talent acquisition umbrella. So at any point, people are going to go through some hardships. They're going to go back to the beginning to building networks, and their process is going to be decimated and they need to rebuild. So, although we've gone through the lens of somebody who's 2 years in and done very well in that 2-year period, it's still relevant to people with a multitude of experience. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, thank you. I look forward to seeing how it is.
I do as well. We'll do a recap of that one. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Stephen.
You've got a call, right? Have you got a call? Oh, I heard the chime.
No,
Okay,
that's
bear
booked
with me
for
a second.
Mark. Yeah, it
I
comes
need
up
you
on
to
my
say
calendar.
something.
Oh God, is this the classic line?
Where is it?
Oh,
Okay. Can you, whenever you're ready, bottom right-hand side in the chat window. Whenever you're ready, look into the camera and say that.
oh yeah. I need to. Okay. Look into the camera. Interested in bringing the sophisticated recruitment for the press more. Okay. Interested in bringing the simplicity to the chaos of recruitment? No, wait, go again. I want to make it a question. Interested in bringing the simplicity to the chaos of recruitment? Follow Peritus for more.
It's fine. We're going to cut that
I'm going
part.
to say Peritus
Right, let me
Partners.
start. Right.
Okay.